In this video, I'm going to be comparing the Iron Man franchise to the Thor franchise. Now, of course, when I talked about the MCU in a different video, I talked about the MCU Iron Man and Thor movies, but there are animated Iron Man and Thor movies that are shorter, which are separate from the MCU. In the case of Thor, you got this movie called Thor: Tales of Asgard. In the case of Iron Man, you have Invincible Iron Man, Iron Man Rise of Technovore, Iron Man and Hulk Heroes United, then Iron Man and Captain America Heroes United. Now, actually, some of these movies, well, two of them actually, are fresh on Rotten Tomatoes. The others are rotten. Now, when you look at the highest score for each franchise, in the case of Iron Man, the first MCU movie has a 94%. When you look at Thor Ragnarok, the third MCU installment in the franchise, has a 93%. So by literally 1%, Iron Man wins this point. Then when you look at lowest score for each franchise, in the case of Thor, the movie Thor: Tales of Asgard only has a 45%. In the case of Iron Man, this movie called Iron Man Rise of Technovore only has a 36%. Thor wins here. But then when you look at average score, Thor actually wins again by just a little bit. It has an average of 69. Iron Man is an average of 66. Then when you look at gap between lowest and highest score, in the case of Thor, you got a gap of 48. In the case of Iron Man, you have a larger gap between 36 and 94. So you're talking about gap of 58. Thor wins here. It's won 3 of the rounds so far, so it's going to win no matter what. And because I haven't seen any of the shorter animated Iron Man or Thor films, what this really comes down to is which set of MCU films do I prefer more, Iron Man or Thor? Now, in the case of Iron Man, I think the 2008 movie, for one, did a great job of laying the foundation for this shared universe. It does a great job of setting up the bigger universe in a way that totally makes sense, that feels natural, that does not in any way feel forced. When you get to the end credit scene, it's really exciting. You're like, oh yes, I absolutely want to see more. I want to see where this is going. But beyond just setting up this universe, it's also just a great movie. Robert Downey Jr. is, of course, fantastic as Tony Stark. He's just effortlessly charismatic. He plays off so well against literally everybody. Pretty much all the other actors and actresses are doing a good job in Iron Man 2008 as well. Even though there's certainly not as much action as there is in later MCU films, the action that is in this movie is done well. Sure, when you get to the third act final battle, okay, it's somewhat anticlimactic, but not all that bad. The score, I'd say, it's quite good. That Iron Man theme song is a piece of score that I really enjoy. I think the visuals here are very good. The suit looks convincing. The story here is very compelling about this really flawed man, Tony Stark, that does become better as the movie goes on, but he obviously still is a flawed person when you get to the end of Iron Man 2008. And right at the end, when Tony Stark reveals that he's Iron Man to the whole world, thus totally subverting what you expect, he completely goes against what other heroes like Superman or Batman do, where they only tell a few trusted people their secret identity. Tony's like, nope, that's not what I want to do at all. I want everyone to know I'm Iron Man because I want the fame. I like being the famous celebrity. It's very effective. Iron Man 2 is a movie that has good action, even though there isn't much of it. When the action happens, sure, it's fun. You still have characters that you admittedly enjoy spending time with, though I will say Tony Stark's not as compelling in this film as he is in Iron Man 2008, because in this movie, Tony frankly just comes up more as, well, just a jerk. I mean, in Iron Man 2008, he's a likable jerk, but in Iron Man 2, because he's being more self-destructive, we see him give in to his worst tendencies. For a lot of the movie, he's dealing with the fact that he's almost dying, so he's just not quite as interesting to watch here. Don't get me wrong, Robert Downey Jr. does a good job with the performance, but with the way the character is written, he just comes off as more of an outright jerk than in the first movie. Also, the story here is quite messy because there's so much going on. There's so many characters, so many subplots. The villains aren't very compelling when one of your main villains is stuck in a lab for pretty much the whole runtime, and in fact, Tony doesn't even know that Whiplash is out there until the racing scene at Monaco, and then Tony doesn't realize that Ivan Vanko's still out there. It's not very interesting, and Justin Hammer, I would say, comes off as too comedic to be any kind of real threat to Tony Stark. I don't think the problem is Sam Rockwell's performance, but with the way the character is written, I don't buy the fact that he's a threat to Tony. And then Iron Man 3 is a movie that definitely has its flaws. I think that while there is something to admire about wanting to subvert expectations, at the end of the day, I don't think the Mandarin twist was a very good idea in the first place. I think the real problem here is that you trade out a more interesting villain for one in the form of Aldrich Killian, who's just not as interesting, who's more generic, feels like other villains we've seen before. And also, I think Tony giving his address to an international terrorist and then not preparing for that whatsoever, not preparing for the Mandarin showing up at all, is just so ridiculously stupid. I do not like that at all. But I think that people tend to over-hate on this one. They tend to overly criticize it and not give the movie enough credit for the things it actually does well. I don't think it's one of the best MCU films, but I don't think it's one of the worst. I think it's a good but flawed movie. Now, in the case of Thor, I think that the original movie, directed by Kenneth Branagh, is a good but not great film. You can feel the MCU trying to figure out how to do a cosmic story. You can tell they haven't figured everything out yet. There's great aspects to this movie, without a doubt. Some of the performances here are fantastic, especially, of course, Tom Hiddleston, who went on to play one of the MCU's best villains. You have Shakespearean grandeur that Kenneth Branagh brings to the screen. Asgard looks really good, but there's a huge tone shift when you go from the grandeur of Asgard to the dullness of New Mexico on Earth. There's a big shift there of the movie becoming much more of a fish out of water comedy. Don't get me wrong, there's funny moments without a doubt, but I've also always found Thor's redemption arc to just be rushed because it happens over a weekend. I don't find the romance between Thor and Jane very interesting, and I think that the Warriors 3 were always underutilized considering their importance to Thor. Then you get to Thor the Dark World, and it's not one of the worst comic book movies ever made. It wouldn't be fair to say that, oh, this movie's another Howard the Duck or Batman and Robin. No, it's not at that level. It's not a disaster. It's not really an incompetent movie. It's just very bland, generic, and forgettable. So it's not one that I've rewatched in a long time. And really, I don't have a desire to rewatch it. Because while there are good things about this movie, everyone will agree with that, overall, it just doesn't leave much of an impact at all because the plot and the villain are so generic. And then Thor Ragnarok is not in any way generic. It is something I think the Thor franchise needed to get people interested in it again. I definitely think there are times where Taika Waititi showed a big lack of restraint, where he just put a joke in a moment where it did not fit and thus undermine the dramatic tension of that scene. Overall, though, I do think Thor Ragnarok works. But then you get to Thor Love and Thunder, and it feels to me like Taika Waititi went way too far this time. He just let his lack of reverence, his utter irreverence, go way too far. And so Thor comes off as so comically dumb. It feels like we're dumbing down the character of Thor so much, just presenting him as an absolute and utter buffoon. We're presenting Zeus as such a dummy, and also Gore is really underutilized. His character should have been so much more interesting, but he just isn't. The movie's really tonally inconsistent. So yeah, I saw it in theaters, but I'm not looking to ever rewatch it. So I would definitely say that I prefer the Iron Man franchise because I enjoy more of those movies. So I would personally choose Iron Man, but Thor is going to win this debate. I'll wrap things up for now.